Hey everybody, welcome back. Welcome back to Online Universe Education, sponsored by Reggie Bird. Um, what's good? How's everybody? How's life? How's quarantine? How's crown life? So you asked and you shall receive content this week that is specific to coronavirus. And what we're going to talk about this week, what I'm going to talk about, and y'all are going to listen because we can't really talk like we used to. What we're going to talk about is a theory, a set of ideas that is very common in sociology and in economics called a theory of collective action and some problems that result from the fact of collective action, namely what's called the collective action problem. And this is similar to and sometimes used interchangeably with the phrase the free rider problem. And so you might know what a free ride is. A literal free ride is if I'm going to the store and you're going to the store and I'm driving my car and I'm going to be driving my damn car anyway to the store. And so you say to me, hey, bro, what about a ride? I got to go to the store too. And I say, well, I'm going to the store anyway. Doesn't make any difference to me. Hop in. So what you have now acquired is a free ride. Yeah? You didn't pay for any of the gas. You didn't pay for any of the wear and tear on the car. You didn't pay a fraction of a percentage of the insurance premiums that I have to pay. All those things, all those costs that accrue to me, all those costs that I confront in order to be able to drive myself to the store, when you got in, you didn't absorb any of those costs, right? So you got literally a free ride. We also hear the phrase free ride used a lot to mean like a scholarship or something like that. So many of us pay to go to school out of pocket. We pay our tuition and we work shitty service sector jobs in many cases in order to be able to pay that tuition, or we take out loans that we know we're going to have to pay back sometime. Some people don't pay tuition. Some people are athletes. Some people are ROTC. Some people have scholarships. And sometimes those opportunities to go to college without having to pay tuition are derogatorily referred to as a free ride, right? Which is basically you're getting something for free. The idea is that you're getting something for free that other people have to pay for. So free ride could be a literal thing, like I'm taking you to the store with me, or it can be a metaphorical thing, like you've got a scholarship to go to school. But today what we're going to talk about is the free rider problem in the context of the theory of collective action. And we're going to tie this in to good old coronavirus, which we are all at the very same time completely sick of hearing about and can't get enough of. I mean, news about it. We can get enough virus. We don't want any more virus. Thank you. So that's what we're going to do today. Hopefully it's going to work out. So through the course of this conversation, this very one-sided conversation, I may or may not end up using a number of these key terms. So keep these terms in mind. Jot them down on a piece of paper in a notebook. In an old notebook like this with a pen like that, and you write. If you remember how to do that, try that. And write them down. And then maybe I will define them, maybe I won't. But because you have a ton of free time right now, when we're done with this little one-word conversation, get on the Google machine and look them up, because they're important words. Some of these actually we probably won't. Carrying capacity might not come up. Collective action will come up. It already has. Free rider will come up. It already has. So let me start by talking a little bit about our current situation, our predicament, crown world. There has been a rash of so we're being asked, as you know, to stay inside because of the incredible capacity for transmission of this contagious disease, COVID-19, and because of how it's ravaging the people that catch it. So we're being asked to stay inside, or at least to be alone when we're outside. We're being asked to socially distance ourselves from others. We're being asked to not congregate in large groups. And many of us are choosing to ignore these requests, to ignore these sort of these standards that have been placed on us that are supposed to be guiding our behavior. And a lot of us are ignoring them sort of flagrantly. We're ignoring them sort of enthusiastically. A lot of us are taking pleasure in flying in the face of these standards. And then a lot of other people are coming back, and social media exacerbates these phenomena just a million times. But then other people are coming back and shaming the people that are ignoring social distancing guidelines, the people that are refusing to self-quarantine. We're shaming the shit out of them on social media. And, you know, it was probably at its peak, the sort of like flagrant, joyous ignoring of these guidelines was at its peak some weeks back, spring break, St. Patrick's Day. You know, this was before in Illinois anyway. It was St. Patrick's Day and the crowded bars that I think really catalyzed the sort of strong language in the shelter-in-place order and that sort of thing. But so fewer people are doing it now, but we continue to do it. I mean, when I'm out on walks or on a jog or something, and it's a nice day, I still see groups of people, usually young people, out grilling, drinking, signs, you know, you honk, we drink. I mean, just last weekend, right? Right here in Bloomington Normal. So people are enjoying, taking pleasure and pride in breaking these rules. They see it as an exercise of their inalienable freedoms, right? They see being told or asked firmly what to do as fundamentally un-American. And so that's the context in which I want to talk about collective action, a theory of collective action problems, and free rider problems, because I think going through this set of ideas is going to help us understand much better the sociology of who self-quarantines, who doesn't, and why. Okay, so there was this man, and his name was Mancur Olson, and that's Mancur, first name, Olson, last name. And Mancur Olson was a political economist in the Department of Economics at the University of Maryland. He passed away some decades ago. He is no longer with us. And in the 1960s, if my memory serves, mid-60s, 65-ish, he wrote a very influential book, which is the book that I'm drawing from. I'm drawing basically from the first chapter of this book in this presentation. And the book was called The Logic of Collective Action. So, the idea here is that basically individual human beings are, and this could be argued, but this has been the basic assumption of the entire field of economics for as long as it has existed. And it is the idea that human beings are fundamentally rationally self-interested. Okay? That means all other things being equal, when you or I are confronted with a decision to make, we are going to make the decision that is in our rational best interest. Okay? Say, for example, you have a job. And I don't know what your job is. Let's just make this up. If we were in person, I'd say, give me an example of a job. But you can't do that because you're not here. So I'll make one up. Let's say you're a bank teller. And as a bank teller, you make, and I'm just making this up, I have no idea what bank tellers make, but let's say you make $15 an hour. And you get an offer at another bank. And that other bank is offering you $16 an hour. Well, the rational, self-interested decision, when you're confronted with this decision, do I stay or do I go? Which is also a very good song. If you're looking for things to listen to on Spotify, look for The Clash, Should I Stay or Should I Go? But anyway, I digress. You are at the bank and you get a job offer for another teller position at a different bank, and you're going to be making $1 more an hour. And so you think to yourself, well, should I stay or should I go? Well, rationally speaking, I should go. All things being equal, I'm going to go, because $1 more is more, and it's in my self-interest to have more. Now, all things aren't equal, right? You might, for example, love the people that you work with, and that might make a difference to you, in which case you might decide to stay. It's not worth it for $1 more to give up working with these people that I love. Or the other bank that's offering you $1 more might be across town or in a neighboring city, and you'd have to spend twice that much in gas to get there and back. And so you do a cost-benefit analysis, and you determine, well, all things being equal, it's actually not in my rational self-interest to take the raise. It is instead in my rational self-interest to stay where I am because I love my colleagues, they're great to work with, and it's really near my house. So those two things outweigh the promise of making $1 more a week, an hour. So this is the basic idea of what we mean by rational self-interest. So to restate this one more time, this is the fundamental assumption of the entire field of economics. And it's debatable, and lots of sociologists take issue with it, but right now, for our purposes, we're going to assume that it's true, or mostly basically true. And that is that when individual human beings are confronted with a decision, should I buy an iPhone or an Android, we are going to make the rational, self-interested decision, the one that makes the most sense at the time. Okay? So Mancur Olson, in his book, A Theory of Collective Action, makes the argument that group behavior and individual behavior are often in conflict with one another. I don't know why I just did this hand gesture to signify conflict, because that means like togetherness. So conflict, they are in conflict with one another. In other words, a group of people has a particular interest in furthering the interest of the group, and the individual has a particular interest in furthering the interest of the individual. And it is often the case that what is in the interests of the group is not in the interests of the individual acting on their own. And I'm going to give you some examples for this to make sense in a couple of slides. But the basics here are that groups, even though a group is made up of individuals, right? Let's say we have a class. Let's say our class in Schrader 244, and there's 80 of us, and we're all sitting there, and that's a group of people. That group of people has a collective interest in learning the material, getting a good grade, and individuals that make up that group have another set of interests that may or may not be the same as the group interests. So what happens is a group of people isn't going to act in the group interest because it's made up of individuals. And the individuals are all going to act in their individual self-interest. Basically, the argument, or one of the sort of fundamental ideological assumptions here, is that the individual is the sort of basic unit of society, not the group. But there's a caveat to this observation that Manker-Olson makes, which is that this kind of behavior, the tensions between individual interests and group interests, and the fact that these things don't always go together, that tension is different depending on the size of the group. For example, or not for example, but to elaborate, if you have a small group, it is much easier for everybody in that group to act in the group interest than if you have a very large group. Okay? So smaller group, easier to achieve group interest. Larger group, harder to achieve the group interest. And that bullet point says the thing I just said. So good for me. So here's a quote from page 2 of the introduction to this book that I'm referring to. And Olson writes, even if all of the individuals in a large group are rational and self-interested and would gain if as a group they acted to achieve their common interest or objective. That's a typo. It should say or objective, not of objective. They will still not voluntarily act to achieve that common group interest. Okay, that's crazy, right? Let's read that one more time. Actually, let's paraphrase it. All of the individuals in the group know what the collective group interest is. And despite that, none of them are going to act in the collective group interest if their individual interest conflicts with that, left to their own devices. Does that make sense? It's kind of bugged out. So let's start with the examples, right? Because examples are good. They help us learn the material. They help me talk about the material. So let me start with an example that all of you know, and you're so sorry that you know it because you hate it. It's the worst thing in the world. It makes your skin crawl. It makes you see red, and it makes you want to shake your fists and throw your phone out the window. And it's called group work. So imagine in my class that I broke the class up into groups of 5 students. And I said, okay, each group of 5 students is going to do a group project in this class. And everybody shudders with fear and anxiety and fury because they hate group work. And you know this because you've done this before. The group of 5 gets together. In the group of 5, there is one alpha person who has a 4.0 GPA and is not going to let anything get in the way of their grade. And that person basically from the jump says, this is what we're going to do. You do this, you do that, I'm going to do this, blah, blah, blah. And then in that group of 5, there's inevitably another person who gives 0.00 fucks. And that person, you form a text chat, and that person never responds. You get together at the library, and that person never shows up. And you're all furious with that person because you know at the end of this thing, you're going to submit a group project, and that person who didn't do a damn thing all semester is going to get the same grade as the alpha person who basically took over the whole project and did the whole thing themselves because they weren't going to let anybody else get in the way of their A. We've all had that, we've all had that happen. We know the deal. Okay, that person that gives 0.00 fucks and didn't lift a finger all semester, that person is a free rider, okay? That person's individual rational self-interest was to not do anything because they didn't really care about learning the material. They had other things that they wanted to do, and they knew that they would get the same grade regardless of whether they put in a bunch of work or no work. And so they elected to put in no work, okay? So in that case, their individual rational self-interest, not doing jack shit, was in direct conflict with the self-interest of the group as a collective, which is produce a good group project and get a good grade. So there is a free rider problem there. But what's going to happen in a group of 5, because these are groups of 5 here, is that next time you see this person, the free rider, in class, on the quad, at a party, wherever it is, the next time you see this person, you're going to go in on this person. And this person's going to kind of feel like ass afterwards. And this person's going to sit there and they're going to think to themselves, I don't want to do this work, and I'm going to get a grade regardless of whether I do it or not. But I also don't want all these other people to hate me. So maybe the peer pressure that I'm experiencing is going to outweigh, and the negative feelings that I have from this peer pressure is going to outweigh my desire to do jack shit. And maybe I'm going to show up to the next meeting. Maybe I'm going to respond to the text thread. So that's called a social sanction, also known in this particular case as peer pressure, okay? You've got a small group doing a group project. There's 5 people in the group. When one person out of the small group doesn't pull their weight, everybody knows who that person is. You cannot hide in a group of 5. Because you can't hide in a group of 5, there are intense social sanctions on you, intense peer pressure that you feel to participate in this project even though you don't want to. Now imagine that we have a group project, but it's the entire class. So there's 85 people doing this group project. And you don't want to participate in it because it's dumb and you got shit to do and you give 0 fucks. And it's a gen ed class. So you don't show up. But there's 85 people in the group. So nobody even misses you, right? And so the social sanctions on you, the peer pressure, is much less intense because the group is much larger. And so the work is distributed, whereas the small group, every single person was basically doing 20% of the work. That's a large percentage. In a giant group, the distribution of the work by percentage is much, much smaller. So instead of 20%, maybe people are doing 2%. And so when one person is free riding on 20% of the work, that feels very different to everybody in the group than when somebody is free riding on 1% of the work or 0.5% of the work. Why does it feel different? Well, for one, because it's much easier to be anonymous in a large group than in a small group. But two, what happens is, if you are free riding in a small group, in a large group rather, which means you're not doing the percentage of the work that is assigned to you, but the group is so large that that percentage is only 1%. So everybody else in the group has to pick up your slack, but it's only 1%, and it's 1% divided by all the other people in the group. That's not a lot of slack for each other person to pick up. It's so little slack that those other people might not even notice that they had to pick it up. Whereas in a small group of 5 people, and the slack that the other 4 people have to pick up is 20%, that's 5% more per person. They are going to notice, and they're going to call you out on your shit because they have 5% more work each, and they know your name because you're not anonymous. Okay? So social sanctions are much more intense in a small group than they are in a large group. Okay? So large groups work to allow more free riding. Okay? Because of the character of the group. Does that make sense? So you've got a group, and there's a group interest. You've got individuals that make up the group. There are individual interests in each of these individuals, and sometimes these individual interests and this group interest clash. And when they do, if you have a large group, you're going to have more free riding than if you have a small group. All right, that's where we are so far. Okay, so let's go through some examples of collective action problems. So we know what we mean by collective action, and we know pretty much what a collective action problem is and what a free rider is. But I want to talk about some specific examples. So let's start with this first one. It says here inter-firm competition. So that's competition between companies that do the same thing. So let's say, for example, I'm looking around and I see, oh no, let's look at this. I like this. Okay, so you see this right here? This is a water bottle. Lots of T sounds. Water bottle. And I run a company called Bottles Incorporated. I'm not very creative with titles. And my company makes water bottles, surprisingly. Well, I have 2 friends. One of my friends is called, I don't know, let's make this up. One of my friends is called Sheila Green. And Sheila Green runs a company called Bottles R Us, and makes water bottles. And then I have another friend called Christian Mendez, and his company is called Chris's Bottles. And so we have 3 companies, and we all make water bottles. They're very similar water bottles. You know, they've got a straw, they've got a spout, they've got a handle, right? They're basically the same thing. So the 3 companies together form a collective, a group of companies that make water bottles. And our collective group interest is obviously to profit as much as we possibly can. And the way that we profit as a group of individual companies that make water bottles is by working to make sure that the cost of water bottles on the global market, the price of water bottles on the global market, is as high as possible. Okay, because the higher the price is on the global market for water bottles, the better off all of us are as a group of companies that make water bottles, right? So far, so good? So, to have a high price, you have to have a scarce commodity, right? We've talked about this at great length in this class. The more abundant something is, the less expensive. The more scarce something is, the scarcer rather that something is, the more expensive, right? That's why aluminum costs a lot less than diamonds. There is more aluminum in the world to be had than there are diamonds, okay? So as a collective, Sheila and Chris and Mike, the three of us together, the owners of the three biggest, best, awesomest bottle manufacturing companies in the universe. Together, collectively, we want a high price for our product, which means we want less of it on the market. Because the less of it that's on the market, the more scarce it will be, the higher the demand will be, the more expensive it will become, right? So as a group of people, we want fewer bottles on the market. However, as a group of companies, rather, we want fewer bottles on the market. However, as an individual owner of a company, I don't want fewer bottles on the market. At least not mine. I'd be happy to have fewer of Sheila's bottles on the market, but I don't want fewer of my bottles on the market. I want as many of my damn bottles on the market as possible. Why? Because I'm the only one that profits from selling my bottles. I don't profit from Sheila selling her bottles. Chris doesn't profit from me selling my bottles. And I don't profit from Chris selling his bottles. You see what I'm saying? I profit from me selling my bottles. So I want to make and sell as many bottles as I possibly can. But here's the thing. So does Chris. Chris wants to make and sell as many bottles as he possibly can because he doesn't profit when I sell mine. He could give a rat's ass if I sell a lot of bottles or a few bottles. He wants to sell a lot of bottles. And Sheila the same. Sheila wants to make and sell as many bottles as possible. Okay, so as a group of 3 bottle making companies, what we want to do is not flood the market with bottles because we want the price for those bottles to be high. But as individual companies, we want to produce as many bottles as we possibly can because the more bottles we produce as individuals, the more money we make. But the more bottles we produce as a group, the less money we make. Mind blown, right? That is a collective action problem. If Sheila and Chris and I could get together and sit around a boardroom table and agree to each produce only 500,000 bottles a year, then what we have done is we've become a cartel, and we basically we control the water bottle market, and so we can determine how much we produce and how much we sell as a collective of companies. But once one of us breaks with that group interest and decides to act in their own self-interest, and it's going to be me, because I'm a dick, and I start making 1 million and selling 1 million bottles, now Chris is saying to himself, there is no way I'm going to stick to these rules and only make 500,000 when Mike is over here making $1 million. I'm going to make $1 million too. That was 2WO, by the way, but whatever, you know what I'm saying. And then Sheila is looking at Chris, and she's like, you know, Mike and Chris broke our cartel agreement, and now they're making millions of bottles. I'm going to make 2 million bottles. And so now we have a competition between the companies to make more and more and more bottles. And the more bottles we make and the more bottles we sell, the cheaper they become on the market. We're flooding the market with water bottles now, and now they cost pennies on the dollar. So our individual interests as companies is against our group interests as a cartel. Capiche? Natural resources. This is a very good example. There's a famous article that you might have even heard of. It's so famous you might have even heard of it, called The Tragedy of the Commons. There's a quote from that article at the bottom of this very slide. But if you have tons of free time and are so inclined, it's, you know, you can get a PDF of it for free online. Just Google Garrett Hardin Tragedy of the Commons and read it. It's fun. Keep it by your bedside. It makes for good sleeping material. But he focuses on free rider problems in the context of natural resources. So let's use the example of fisheries or fishing. Let's use the example of fishing. So let me pick a couple random names from the roster here. Let's go with, Brady Beard. All right, what's good, Brady? I haven't talked to you in a minute. And let's go with Sydney. Sydney's been active in the chats and in the comments. So Sydney Herring and Brady Beard and Michael Doherty. Okay, and let's get one more. Let's get one more. Let's go with Michaela McCreary. All right, so Michaela and Brady and who did I say? Me and somebody. I said somebody. I already forgot. All these examples are burning my brain. Well, okay, let's not even use examples because my brain is broken. I'm sorry. So just 4 random people, A, B, C, and D. That's easy to keep track of. Okay, A, B, C, and D are fisher people. They each have a boat, and they each go fishing, and they catch fish, and then they sell fish, and that's how they make their living. Okay, well, for me, as fisher person A, the more fish I catch, the more fish I can sell. And the more fish I can sell, the more money I make. And that's better for me, right? I want to make more money. Well, the same goes for person B. The more fish they catch, the more fish they sell, the more money they make. And the same goes for person C, and the same goes for person D, until we get to a point where we are drawing down the stock of fish in the oceans faster than it can be replenished. Okay? That's, by the way, what we mean when we talk about carrying capacity. So once the fisher people and all of their fishing begins to draw down the stock of fish in the ocean at a faster rate than those fish can be replenished, we are now producing unsustainably. And what happens is each of our individual interests is now working against our collective interest. Why? Because our collective interest as a collective of fisher folk is that there be enough fish in the oceans for us to continue fishing forever and continue making a living fishing forever, right? Our group interest as a group of fisher folk is that we never run out of fish in the ocean. But my individual interest as a fisherman is to fish as many damn fish as I can fish and possibly fish and sell them and live in a giant Justin Bieber mansion. paid for entirely with fish. That's what I want. But if I do that, then everybody else is going to do that. They're going to fish the hell out of the oceans, and in 30 years, there won't be any fish left for the fisher folk to fish. You see what I'm saying? So we've got a collective action problem. We've got a set of individual interests, and we've got a group interest, and these two things are in conflict. Let's give another example. Taxes. Taxes, okay? All of us drive on roads that the government built. Every single one of us. All of us, what else do we do? We all feel safe in our day-to-day lives, or at least we did before February of 2020. We felt safe in our day-to-day lives. We didn't walk out of the house. I mean, most of us didn't walk out of the house and think, okay, an enemy country is likely to bomb me today, right? And the reason why we don't think that is because we have some very sophisticated and very effective armed services that operate in defense of this country, okay? So we all drive on roads. We all don't worry about getting bombed to death every day. What else do? We eat, we bite into juicy, medium rare hamburgers, right? We bite into juicy, medium rare hamburgers and we expect, we assume, we believe, we know that when we bite into a juicy, medium rare hamburger, it's not actually going to be made out of rat poop, right? All of these things we have because we belong to a country and we pay dues to be members of that country, and we have a government in that country that acts on our behalf, okay? So we pay dues to be members of the club called America, Club America. And we pay dues in the form of taxes. And the management of Club America represents us, and they collect our dues from us, and they use those dues to build things that are in the public interest, right? They build roads for us to drive on, and they build armies to keep us safe, and they build the Food and Drug Administration to make sure our food isn't poisonous, and they build schools to make sure we can all read, right? And they do that with our money, okay? And I feel like we probably talked about this in class before, but like if I were the government of the United States and I came to you and I said, listen, Joey, do we have a Joe? We have a Joe in the class. Anyway, so I say, hey, Joe, listen, here's the deal. I really need your tax money to cover your percentage, your fraction of the roads and the military and the schools and the bureaucracy and all the stuff that we do on behalf of all the members of Club America. I really, really need your tax money. But, it's your money. You earned it, buddy. So I'm going to make it voluntary. Okay, I need it. I would really like to have it. It would be good for you too, man, because it would mean better roads and less rat poop in your burger. So, but it's voluntary because it's your money. You earned it. Do what you want with it. But please hit me off. But do what you want with it, right? If I said that to you, 99% of us would be like, yeah, I feel you with the roads and things, but I'm going to keep that. You can go ahead. None of us, if taxes were voluntary, none of us would agree to pay them. Why? because it is not in our rational individual self-interest to cough up thousands of dollars a month of our hard-earned cash to subsidize paving roads and refinishing sidewalks and refurbishing sewer lines. It isn't worth it for me to pay us several $1,000s a year for you to have nicer sewers. It isn't worth it for me to pay money for public schools. I don't have my kid in public schools. I don't care about your kid. You know, as Chris Rock once said, I don't give a fuck how dumb your kids are. However, and so that's a collective action problem. The way that the government gets around that collective action problem is that it obligates us to pay taxes. Okay, so the reason why none of us would pay taxes is because, if we had the choice, is because Club America is a big ass group. There are a lot of people that live in Club America. Okay, and it is so big that if Joey B. Anthony III decided not to pay his taxes, nobody would really notice that his contribution was gone. The tiny little bit of sidewalk refurbishing that his contribution to that whole collective coffer would have covered is so insignificant when divided by 400 million people that nobody would have noticed. Now, if Club America had 10 people in it and Joey didn't come up with his taxes, we'd all know. We'd go to Joey's house, we'd knock the door down, we'd hold him down, and we'd go into his pockets. But when you've got 400 or 370 million people in the club and one person free rides by not paying their taxes, none of us are going to notice, none of us are going to really care. Then 2 people start free riding and none of us notice. Then 100,000 start free riding and none of us notice. Then 1 million people start free riding and we start to notice, right? And that's why taxes are obligatory. That's why we don't have the choice of whether or not to pay them. Because if we did have that choice, none of us would pay them. And then we wouldn't have roads to drive on, armies to defend us, schools to educate us, and the Food and Drug Administration to keep the rat poop out of our burgers. So we avoid that collective action problem, which is very severe because of the size of the group, by making the payment of those dues, aka taxes, mandatory. The same thing happens with unions, right? It used to be actually an Illinois person, a person from Champaign-Urbana. I think I have this right. It's been a couple years, but a person from Champaign-Urbana sued to not have to pay union dues. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled on his behalf. So just a couple of years ago, thanks to some schmo in Champaign-Urbana, unions are no longer allowed to force employees to pay dues, which is essentially the death knell for unions. It's the nail in the coffin for groups that advocate for and lobby on behalf of the workers that have very little voice, very little say, very little influence in their jobs and in their lives. So it's a problem that happened. It's a real stain on our democracy. But I'm digressing and editorializing a little bit here. But anyway, up until a couple of years ago, union dues were obligatory, or unions could force people that work in particular companies to pay union dues. And for the same reason that the US government forces us to pay taxes. Because if they didn't force us to pay taxes, nobody would pay taxes. And if nobody paid taxes, then our collective interests wouldn't be taken care of. We would sacrifice our collective interests for our individual interests. We would totally sacrifice the roads and the armies and the schools and everything that the government provides to keep that $3,000, that $7,000 a year. We would do that. Every single one of us would do that. The same thing happens with the unions. Yes, I want a group of people advocating for me, defending me if my rights are being infringed upon, negotiating with management to make sure that my wage keeps up with the cost of living, and making sure that my pension is looked after, and so on and so forth. I want that. But am I willing to come up with $3,000 a year for it? Maybe not. And if I'm not willing to come up with $3,000 a year for it because my individual interest in keeping that $3,000 is in conflict with my collective interest of the group of workers in advocating for all of us, then other people are going to do the same thing. Okay, well, I'm not coming up with my union dues. Okay, well, I'm not coming up with my union dues. And before long, you have no union, right? And the reason why that happens comes down to the distinction between group benefits and individual costs. Okay, so it is in my individual, I gain more as an individual from keeping my union dues money than I gain as an individual from paying that money. Because if I don't pay my money, then that cost, that added cost, gets distributed between all the other people paying their money, right? And so it just isn't in my rational self-interest to do that. And the very same phenomenon is at work with climate change. So let's just say that I really like to drive a Hummer. Okay, love me some Hummers. So I'm driving Hummers. I have 4 different pastel colors. I've got a bright yellow one, I've got an orange one, I have a baby blue Hummer, and then one that's black. And I drive them, a different Hummer every day. Love me some Hummers. And of course, I am polluting the planet in a disproportionate way, right? I could just as easily get from my house to the grocery store, to the bank, and to my office in an electric car. I could almost as easily get there on a bicycle or on foot, right? I don't need a Hummer. And so I am producing more pollution, more carbon monoxide that's heating up the atmosphere, that is playing havoc with weather, that is raising sea levels, that is threatening the long-term viability of planet Earth. Okay? But when I drive my Hummer, I, and only I, receive benefits from that. Okay? So the benefits, the value of driving that Hummer, 100% of those benefits go to me, right? But the cost of driving the Hummer, I only have to pay 1/1,000,000th, right? Because however many people there are in the world, divide the bit of carbon monoxide that I'm putting up there in the atmosphere, divide that by all the people on the planet, and that's the tiny minuscule fraction of the cost that I'm paying. Whereas the benefit, I get all of it because it's my Hummer, right? If I leave my lights on, if I take a 2-hour long piping hot shower, right? Yep, that's bad for the environment, and yes, it was totally unnecessary, but I did it. And why did I do it? Because I'm the only one that benefits from it, and everybody else around the world is paying the cost of the water scarcity and the energy scarcity and the pollution that comes from that long piping hot shower, right? So I get all the benefits, but I only pay 1/1 billionth of the costs. So we have, so the collective pays the cost of the free ridership, whereas the individual free rider gets all of the benefits of the free ridership, right? So it is basically built into our DNA to free ride. So let me read this quote by Garrett Hardin, part of which is blocked, obviously, by my beautiful face here, but it says, "The rational person finds that their share of the cost of the wastes they discharge into the commons is less than the cost of purifying their wastes before releasing them. Since this is true for everyone, we are locked into a system of, quote unquote, fouling our own nest." Okay? So in other words, all of the incentives for me to pollute are there because I get all of the benefit of my pollution, but I only pay a tiny fraction of the cost. So that's why it's so hard to convince individuals to act on behalf of the environment. That's why it is proven impossible to rein in climate change. We are all sitting around looking up into the sky, thinking to ourselves, this planet is going to be unrecognizable in 70 years. And I'm not going to do a damn thing to stop it because I am right now enjoying 100% of the benefits of driving my car and leaving all the lights on and burning coal and doing all the stuff that I do, right? So, part of what Manker Olson talks about in this chapter is that we often believe that groups are that we are naturally predisposed to be in and to act as collectives. We are naturally disposed as humans toward collective action. And there are different variants of that logic. One of which he refers to as the casual variant, is the idea that we are basically social animals, and so it is our kind of it's baked into our DNA basically as Homo sapiens that we get together in groups, and that's how we get by. And then there's the sort of what he calls the formal variant, which in sociology we might call the structural functionalist variant, which is the idea that groups exist because they are important to societal functioning, that we need groups in society to serve particular purposes that individuals cannot serve for themselves. And both of these sets of arguments make the case that we are fundamentally oriented toward collective action. And so this whole set of ideas about free riding, the free rider problem, and costs versus benefits, this is Olson's way of trying to undermine those claims and saying, actually, we are not naturally collectively minded, and groups of human beings, aggregates of human beings, don't work. They don't achieve their collective interest unless the cost of the collective interest is low enough that every individual is willing to absorb it, or the group can somehow obligate everybody to do their part. So the government can obligate us to pay our taxes. And so they get around the free rider problem that way. Trade unions, labor unions used to be able to obligate us to pay our memberships, and they could get around the free rider problem that way. But other collectives aren't able to achieve this. And so what does this actually mean when it comes to, so this whole very lovely erudite set of ideas, what am I supposed to do with this? How do I act on this? Well, I think there are basically two main lessons that we can draw from this. One is that smaller groups work better, okay? So if I'm going to break you up into groups for a group project, I'm going to make it groups of 5 rather than groups of 100. And in the instance that we have larger groups, the only way to overcome the collective action problem is to make collective action compulsory, making individual action on behalf of the collective compulsory. So again, the government forcing us to pay taxes, right? If I had some mechanism to force you to do your group work, I would do that, right? So we ought to seek to operate in small groups, and where we can't operate in small groups, we need mechanisms to compel individuals to act in the collective interest. And so all of this becomes relevant for us. I promised you at the beginning of this lecture this was going to be about coronavirus, and it has been not at all about coronavirus. And we've been at this for 1 minute and 4 seconds. No, I'm sorry, 1 minute. 1 hour, 4 minutes, 50 seconds, and we haven't said the word coronavirus once. So let's say the word coronavirus. 1, 2, 3, coronavirus. So the reason why I included a lecture on the logic of collective action here is because whether we go out of our houses right now or not, whether we break quarantine or not, whether we hang out with friends or not, whether we go to Walmart and pretend it's for bread and really it's for Legos or not, is a collective action problem. Okay, that's the connection, that's the hook. Our choice to not abide by the stay-at-home order or the shelter-in-place order, our choice to not self-quarantine or to break our self-quarantine now and again, that is a collective action problem. When we leave the house and go to the mall, we are acting in our individual self-interest at the expense of the interest of the collective. So breaking quarantine is a collective action problem. We have an individual self-interest, which is to have fun, to live life, to be unfettered and free, and we have a collective interest, which is to stop the spread of coronavirus, right? To flatten the curve. We have a collective interest to keep our entire country and our entire world healthy, happy, operating, right? And these two things are in conflict with each other. Us going to the mall, us going to a barbecue is in direct conflict with the collective goal of keeping the world healthy. But individuals are, it's easy for us to free ride, right? It's easy for me to say, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to get some new sneakers because I like sneakers, and it's no big deal. It's just one person going to the store one time to get 2 shoes. That's all it is. I'm not going to 18 stores. I'm not going to the store 700,000 times. It's just one person, one time, one store, two shoes. But who knows what happens, right? Who knows what I touch? And then another person who just went to the store one time for one thing, one store, touches something and touches something else, and it snowballs, right? The collective interest, collective action right now, the group interest is that all of us stay home. But our individual rational self-interest is party. And particularly if we're younger, if we are healthy, it becomes even harder for us to believe that acting in our individual interest is going to put the interests of the group at risk. But what we have is a perfect collective action problem. What we have is a situation where if I go out to the store one time, one store for two shoes, I receive 100% of the benefits of me going to the store. 100%. All of the benefits come to me. I have the joy of driving, the wind whipping through my hair. I get the pleasure of being out and seeing colors. I get the satisfaction of putting on new shoes. 100% of the benefits of me going to the store to buy sneakers come to me. But I pay a teeny tiny fraction of the cost. That cost of me going to the store, the jeopardy that produces for the health of society is absorbed by everybody else. And so because I'm getting all the benefits and I'm only paying a tiny fraction of the cost, other people are also going to do the same thing. They're going to free ride, because this is a big group. This is like climate change big. This group is so damn big, it's every human being on the whole planet that is alive in 2020. It's all of us. That's how big this group is. And so the group is so big that the cost of each of us as individuals free riding is very, very small to the rest, except when we have a cascade of free ridership. When I free ride, and then you free ride, and then all the people free ride, then everyone's free riding, and then no one's acting in the collective interest, and there's no curve flattening, and then millions of people die, right? So that's the point that I wanted to make. I wanted to draw out the idea that because we bristle, right? People tell us to stay home and we think to ourselves, who are you to tell me to stay home? I am free. I am a self-determining, fully autonomous human being. I will go to Walmart if I damn well please, Mr. Pritzker. We bristle. We don't like to be told what to do. When it comes to taxes, the government can obligate us, does obligate us to pay our taxes. I mean, we might try to not pay them, but there's a really good chance that if we don't pay them a couple years in a row, we'll get audited and then we'll owe them, right? We might free ride on speed limits and hope nobody notices, right? It's in my individual self-interest to get to the place that I'm going as fast as I fucking can, but it's in the collective interest that I drive safely. And so, because nobody else cares how fast I get there. Nobody else cares if I'm late to class, but everybody else cares that I don't kill them or myself. So, you know, we sometimes push the boundaries of collective action when it's obligatory, not speeding. Sometimes we speed, but we know that we run a risk. If we speed, we're going to get caught eventually, and we're going to get fined. the government hasn't really been able to obligate us to not go out. Now, I don't know about where you're living right now, but in Bloomington Normal, I believe both mayors, I know at least the mayor of Bloomington, Terry Renner, has said, if you violate the social distancing and we catch you, the police are authorized to fine you. They can fine you. It's a few $100s. So there are now beginning to be mechanisms put in place to obligate, to force us to act in the collective interest, to not go out, to not have a barbecue, even if it's a beautiful 68-degree sunny afternoon. And that's hard, by the way, for all of us. So there are beginning to be ways that local governments are coming up with and state governments are coming up with to try to enforce that. But it's not being enforced at the federal level. It's not being enforced like taxes are enforced, right? And so it's beautiful out, and and we miss people, and it's really easy for us to think right now that we are not harming anybody by going out. So I wanted to read you these quotes. So I recently joined Nextdoor.com, which is social media for like really boring middle-aged people, and it's fascinating. It's like Nextdoor.com is sociological. It's a sociological gold mine. I'm like just burning up all of my free time, like reading these ridiculous threads on Nextdoor.com. It's the craziest thing. But so there was this long discussion that started with this post that somebody made about how pissed they were that there were so many people in hardware stores. And why aren't hardware stores closed, that they're not essential, that I get people need to go to grocery stores, but hardware stores maybe not, and even if on some occasions it's essential, like if you've got a plumbing problem or something, there shouldn't be that many people at hardware stores right now. And so it was this long thread. I copied it and I pasted it into a Word document, and I asked you to read it for today. But it says, so I'm just going to read a few of these quotes because I just think it was so fascinating. So one person says, for example, I am sure there are many people who are doing home improvement projects just to stay sane. I saw people buying flowers, lumber, and a grill. The economy needs to live through this too. To which somebody replied, are flowers and a new grill more important than overworking medical personnel and endangering and at-risk people's lives? Priorities, I guess. Little snarky, but also super on point. And then the third quote says, I think everybody should just mind their business. Now, if it were me, I'd throw damn in there, because that's how I roll. Expletives sprinkled throughout. So let's do it Mike style. I think everyone should just mind their damn business. Truth is, you don't know their damn lives. It's spring. Maybe they're making repairs to their house, because you do that in the spring. Duh. And people have nothing but time right now. So if you have made it all the way through to hour and 16 minutes, then let us have a heated but respectful and gentle debate in the comment section below about these quotes, because they are all logical. They all make sense. We have a lot of free time right now. We need to paint our bedrooms. We need to plant grass in our bald-ass front yards. Speaking for myself. We need to do that. Well, we don't need to do that, but we would really like to. We have the opportunity. It is a perfect opportunity to plant grass in our bald front yards. Except that in order to do that, in order for me to plant grass in my bald front yard, which I would really like to do, It's 100% in my interest to do that. But in order for me to do that, I literally have to put the whole world's health at risk. That's a lot to sit on my shoulders. I literally have to contribute to the taxing and the exhaustion of our overworked and overburdened medical system. I'm literally probably killing people to have grass. It's in my self-interest to go to the hardware store, but I get 100% of the benefits, but I only pay a teeny tiny fraction of the cost. Okay? And so the two quotes, quote 1 and quote 3 on this slide here, are making the case that that individual freedom is more important than acting in the collective interest. That exercising our individual freedom is more important than trying to stop the spread of this virus. And that is a powerful argument. It is a resonant argument. And in my opinion, it is a selfish and very, very problematic argument. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. And this has been a long video. I think this is my longest video yet. Maybe I'll break it up into two and drop it in 2 chunks. But do comment. Let me know what you think. Am I full of shit? I might be. It could happen. Okay. I hope you're all well. Thinking about you. Stay sane. Don't go to the hardware store unless it's a plumbing emergency. Goodbye.